This is a video really introducing what we're going to term within the Nihilist Association of Australia a values-free space. So let's just review, if you like, what we mean by nihilism and what does it mean to put the term ISM behind something like nihil or nihilist or even idealism, realism, and here nominalism. I'll just go quickly through those because we're familiar with idealism, I think. That's the idea that it's only ideas. Reality consists of ideas. So even chair is an idea. So the furniture of the world, the objects of the world are somehow, because they're mediated by brain, if you like, or mind, if you like, interpreted as such, that there is pretty much a subjective component to all objects. Now, that might only be a bit of psychology, that yes, there's a brain involved. But the point is, since the mid-19th century, idealism has had sway, if you like. So from there, realism, which is a bit more facts oriented. So realism would be, well, there are facts about objects. It's not that they're ideas. There are objects like brains which interpret objects and such. Yes, there is, rather than ideas of chairs or furniture in our minds that help us navigate the world, there are indeed real chairs in the world that are objects, regardless of whether our mind fabricates them, if you like, as this or that colour, this or that shape. I mean, there's the basic chair, which shall always be there, and then there's the interpretation of the brain of that object, which accounts for all the variation around experience, if you like. So, there we go. Nominalism is a kind of suggestion that there's an approximation working in our experience, that we approximate the chair somehow. It's not that it's not an object there, but it's not as if it's only an object in which our brain has clearly seen it one-to-one, but that our brain is more approximating the chair, it's putting the chair together, it's constructing the chair, if you like. So it's, in the form that I use, its variation is conceptualism, and we do focus a lot on concepts in discussing these issues. So nominalism kind of sits well with idealism and realism. I'm not particularly here to define them. You can find definitions of idealism and realism, but certainly the issue of ideas alone consisting of reality now, or reality consisting of ideas rather, that's the broader question we're getting to. What's reality really about, made of, or why does it operate the way that it does, this sort of thing. So these philosophical questions, and of course science will have a lot to say about that. And when we talk about the experience of the chair, we of course can be quite scientific about it. It's straightforward, one-to-one experience of an object in the world, not a problem. However, what's that got to do with the total picture of reality? We don't access the total picture of reality like we do a chair. So there's a kind of difficulty there. So if we are broadening it out, let's say, yes, we're going to talk about reality. Therefore, we do get into these broader concepts, metaphysics and ontology. Right now, I'm very interested and have been working hard to work up the relationship between nihilism, metaphysics, and nihilism and ontology. These two are very they're in that kind of the same ballpark, but there's a variation there. Metaphysics basically is when you say how much of reality, or how shall reality divide. So how much is, for instance, mind. So in the earlier reference to idealism, 100% mind. Well, that's a type of idealism. It's a very strong one, it's a very popular one. From there, from the idealism, you've got this issue with solipsism, and that's partly or partially resolved by what we call dualism, which is a metaphysics itself. Now that brings us to what we're saying about metaphysics in relation to reality. Metaphysics is your attempt to engage in that broader concept beyond just objects, but the total. So you'll have in there another ism, and let's just note it now. Not that it's particularly useful, but universalism. So that's another ism that is problematic for idealism. It's problematic for realism, because both idealism, use of ideas, the idea that solely it's ideas that we work with, that's a kind of universal claim. Now with realism, you've got probably a basic division, facts and values. So realism is quite comfortable with facts and can easily separate or set aside the values that attach to facts. So with that, it's obviously realistic, but it also leans on universalism. That is, the idea that you can make total statements about reality. Regardless, you're in metaphysics when you're doing that, and metaphysics typically will say, what's the universe made of? The scientists today, perhaps they don't say it anymore, that it's completely material, that it's made of atoms moving around at incredible speeds. Maybe they don't say that anymore because of the depth of theory, the depth of a lot of the mathematics around the potential for dimensions well beyond the experience of dimensions. So these are dimensions that are deduced through mathematics, and that's another area altogether. But sticking to metaphysics, are we handling one world, or one universe if you like, and in our trying to understand that reality if you like, that universe, are we in fact dealing with one thing or two things? So with one thing, it would be monist metaphysics. With two things, dualist metaphysics. So dualism, it's up here as well. So dualism could be a kind of idealism. Dualism is your classic Cartesian, common sense, there is a mind, there is a body. And now we all experience it. We experience a body, we experience a mind. We don't so much experience a brain. The brain is the thing doing the experiencing, if you like. However, I don't want to go down the psychological track particularly. I just want to stick to it here, that what we're trying to grasp is a take on reality that accounts for those experiences and the possibilities that it could be just one item or two items. So is reality one thing? Well, on face, yes it is. Reality is one thing. We're in it. But we happily divide it. Science divides it, finds different material if you like, but ultimately there's a physics question there about the nature of the relationship between either energy in terms of waves, particles in terms of material, I suppose. So you're into concepts of energy, wave, flux, entropy, all sorts of things come into it. when we're doing a science. But we're not doing science, we're doing philosophy. So we'll move on. So metaphysics is that work that you do to match your concepts with not only experience, but with, as I say, the whole. So are we able to do that at all, given that there's more than the dimensions that are experienced, which is just a fascinating conundrum in its own right. But let's just stick to our limits, which are 4 dimensions, if you like, the extensions up, down, east, west, depth, 3 different or 3 different measures of space, if you like, to establish relationships between things. And then the 4th is duration or time. That is a period in which a change occurs, so that's the experience side of it. We know time through experience, it's experienced as linear. Or time is sort of more a theoretical element that you could try to remove the subjective parts from, but you'll be deeply into theoretical science regardless. So, let's just stick with metaphysics for the minute. What we're saying is that to make a claim about the whole, we're going to either be referring to one element, or 2 elements that make up the whole, or 3 elements that make up the whole, or any number of elements that make up the whole. Now, when I say elements, I don't mean the elements of the table of the table of elements. Yeah, I don't mean that so much as the because that's all one single thing known as atoms, and we know that that's not the whole of the story of what's in existence. And as I said, as scientists, you bring in that energy, wave, power, force, all those sort of more nuanced things that science will bring in principles to explain and do so deductively through the maths involved. Now, that's not what we're doing here. So, metaphysics, a typical one is monism or dualism, so that's a good, they're 2 big ones. So even if it is monist, so if you decide, there's only one thing in reality, that I experience, that I'm going to claim to be universal within limits, and that is the material world, of which there are brains which account for the conscious experience of that world, consciousness itself. So, we'll just keep going. So, of those things, let's take monism and let's take dualism. So, in dualism, you would have the same thing as the monism, but then you'd also have mind. Just very broad stroke. It's not as if they're going to agree that it's the same stuff. So, mind and body. Let's just assume there is mind, and then we bring a kind of idealism into it, because the mind's going to operate more around ideals and ideas. Realism probably belongs more to the singular, that is, that there's facts and there's this human behaviour of values that gets put on, right? Not forgetting our broad context here, which is that we're getting to that idea of values-free space back in here, up here with nihilism. Because nihilism, if you like, displaces that. I mean, what's going on there? How do you have a values-free space? How do you be human? How are humans value-free? I don't believe they are typically. Most behaviour is interested, self-interested, Anyway, that's another question. What we're doing now, though, is deciding, okay, one or two or more for our basic metaphysics. So, back to one, monism. But there is only one thing, type of thing, that makes up reality. And that element could be a number of things. So early on, science, it's a material, well, before then it's a God-given universe, so God held that mystery. But early science, materialism gains traction, atoms are discovered, 19th century, spills into 20th century, but the theory starts to break down that materialism. A kind of atomism that did not last, I think, much past 1930s. So let's just jump now to ontology. What we mean by that is your theory of being. So of that thing, of that singular thing that you've chosen, say it's material, but the nihilist here, or at least myself, that's not, although I am monist, that's not my chosen item, not material. So I want to just emphasize that's the example, the material. If we were in a material world, and in a certain sense we are in a material world, we don't float off with, when we try to sit down in a chair. We sit down in a chair, we've got a functional relationship with all the objects. So for our day-to-day, we are in a material relationship, a practical relationship. But that question only really opens up the nature of the relationship that we have with an objective world. And it is a practical one, that we must pull the chair from the table before we take our seat. But ontology is going to look at the existence of that item, that singular item that's said to be the one thing. So, for the materialist, monist, metaphysician, the ontological question would be, what is the being of the material, if you like, of which I am claiming even humans are made up. Now, for a long time, as I said, till about 1930, we decided yes, that was the case. Materially, we covered just about everything, and psychology, I suppose, to be hard-nosed about it, was really an account of behaviour. And you can see the realism in that, if you like, because there's no value really in that. You're maintaining a scientific objectivity where human values aren't really brought in or out of it. And the claims, although theoretical, they don't necessarily claim to be universal truth, but they are worked on as if. So, not particularly defending it, I'm just sort of trying to set the context for why we're going to move to the metaphysical and ontological question of nihilism. What's the metaphysics of nihilism? What's the ontology of nihilism? Well, just to finish with ontology, the being of that very thing that we're talking about, reality. Well, the being of, we can account for it, it's in our experience. We can experience, however material or materially, we can experience the world. We can kind of step back and talk about the practicalities of that relationship, as opposed to the experience of the object, but then you are experiencing the practicality of the relationship. Now, this is really quite a broad kind of topic, because once you look at the relationship that one has to objects, you end up being kind of Marxian and discussing the actual material economical elements of any relationship. So that brings in sociology or the social circumstances of the object being there, which in turn goes back into history and how it is that you're in a ghetto or a poor neighbourhood as opposed to in a middle class neighbourhood talking about the furniture in the room. Maybe you don't have furniture, so you've got this paucity of experience. So how do you get out of that if you're going to start talking about practical relationships? How are you going to get away from that? That's why opening up that part of the sets of relationships is going to take a fair bit of work if that's your interest. But ontologically and importantly, we should be accounting for the material that we are justifying it. The material that we say that the world is made up of. So if the world's made up of material, is it purely that I have a physical relationship with the chair, that I don't float off into space when I attempt to use it? Why is it so, and can I ignore the economic elements that brought that chair to the middle class house, etc. So there's even a political element. What were the terms in which the actual example, and it's all very good to have an abstract example of an abstract chair, but there are no abstract chairs, there are only chairs, to be realistic about it. Importantly, nominalism does not have this problem of universalism. So making these claims about relationships, practice, objects, all that sort of stuff, nominalism has an advantage in that it reminds us it's just an approximation and you really should just be speaking about a particular chair. That in a metaphysical sense, you don't get to have an abstract chair. There is a chair, a specific chair that you're looking at, you're referring to, that you've experienced, and that you want as your example, and it should be declared as such. So that would be a nominalist approach. We don't have a universalism here. We've hit the limit of idealism and realism because of the universalism problem. Hang on a sec.